We are now in the 80s, the decade of my childhood where everything felt magical. Needless to say, I'm very nostalgic about it, and in my mind, even mediocre titles seem better than what they actually are. Not that there weren't any actual good stuff in it. 1981 had these 5 spectacle movies, which are still fondly remembered by most. Okay, maybe not Quest for Fire, but I placed it in the good stuff for this year, for being the best caveman movie I know of. As for a must-watch, there is Das Boot, by far the best realistic war flick regarding submarines. It is ridiculously long, but it's almost entirely gripping thanks to its attention to detail, and the constant battles, moral debates, times of levity and times of tragedy. It's not for those who are used to fast-paced Michael Bay explosions. If you want to fully enjoy it, you have to be patient with it. In anime, this is when episodic school comedies begin to replace period dramas with plot continuity as the hottest thing around. It's also when anime begin to openly invite gooners instead of having fan service as a minor element. Thus, this is the first popular anime where everything begins to go wrong. 1982 had 2 rather famous science fiction titles. One was E.T., which is still considered a great family-oriented action flick. It had such a huge impact on pop culture, it was even indirectly responsible for the collapse of Atari, which brought forward the Japanese video game market and resulted in all the classic games we grew up with. The other title is the second Star Trek movie, which many loved mostly for the sadistic main villain and the meme it created. From cool movies there is The Thing, one of the most amazing horror films ever made, Tron, the original trapped in a video game story that has a very distinctive look, unlike all following films that look generic as hell, and of course Conan the Barbarian, that is about half-naked alpha males slashing each other to bits and hearing the lamentations of their women. What more can you want from life? Now for the must-watch movies of the year. One is The Plague Dogs, which is by far the most horrifying and depressing animated movie with animals I have seen in my life. I went in fully prepared for what it's about and it still destroyed me emotionally. You probably recognize the first Rambo movie, which is actually about PTSD and feeling unwanted by your own country than the mindless action flicks later films turned into, so it's worth a watch. And the best movie of the year is Blade Runner, the cult classic that defined cyberpunk, has superb music, and is full of intellectual themes. Is it also rather dull and somewhat pretentious? Yes, but look on the bright side, it's not Psycho-Pass. From books, this is the beginning of The Dark Tower, where Stephen King smokes pot and writes whatever bullshit comes to mind. Despite their popularity, they are like the Tower of God. Just a random pile of good ideas and absolutely nothing else. From TV series, in Japan, the Metal Heroes franchise begins with Gyaban. Amazing music, great special effects for its time, and a 5-episode story that got stretched to 50. In America, Knight Rider begins airing, and guess why people liked it? Amazing music and great special effects for its time. It never had an ongoing plot, but who cares? It had a car with an AI 40 years before it began being a thing. In manga, Akira and Nausicaa, 2 cult classics with amazing artwork and cool themes, begin being published. Despite getting movie adaptations, they were not faithful nor complete, so you have to read them to get the full scope. And in anime, Macross does not age with time. It has a specific style that keeps it eternally special in the minds of everyone who watched it. If Gundam is the serious sci-fi war epic, Macross is the campy sci-fi war epic. It's not trending nowadays because people hate mecha, but it's otherwise one of those oddities that I will forever be recommending. Not the rest of the franchise, obviously. In 1983, the best movies were Scarface, another great mafia flick, and the third movie of the good Star Wars trilogy, not the bad ones. In books, Discworld began being published, one of the funniest fantasy satires. They are completely chaotic in plot and most of the jokes come from sarcastic commentary, which will not work for everyone. In anime, Barefoot Gen became a sensation for a while for covering the nuclear bombing, only to be surpassed a decade later by a different animated movie. In video games, Dragon's Lair began the trend of quick time events with fancy animation, something that died out rather fast since there wasn't much gameplay, and the sessions were extremely short. Finally, in cartoons, He-Man began the infomercial era. Prior to it, there was a law that was forbidding cartoons from advertising toys, which is why Marvel and DC adaptations were so different to their source material. He-Man was not a faithful adaptation either, but it was the first to shamelessly promote the source material. Here are some toys. We made a cartoon to make you kids want to buy them. Give us your money. Yes, it was marketing brainwashing, but it was also what made me to love my toys as a kid. They were more than pieces of plastic when they had their own mythos and adventures on television. They had a life of their own. Plus, He-Man was basically a family-friendly version of Conan the Barbarian. I always loved Conan. It's what got me into board games with Hero Quest, and from there to Dungeons and Dragons. So you can imagine why it was a huge deal at the time. But besides the impact it had on me, do I still like it? Besides the opening theme? Nope. It's stupid and lazily written. Plus, anything else that they made afterwards in the franchise only managed to further damage your memories of it. I hated the She-Ra spin-off, the live-action movie was lame, the sequel series had nothing in common besides a few cameos and names, and the reboot was try hard and failed to make an impression. The best thing I can say about it is how it inspired Thundercats, a far better series. Another very popular cartoon that had begun airing this year was G.I. Joe, which I was never a big fan of, but it had a lot of action and explosions, and back then this was the only thing that mattered. Many hate it today for its supposed American Army propaganda and make fun of those moral messages they had at the end of the episodes. But for me the biggest issue was how nobody was ever getting killed. Which could be said about all cartoons at the time, but it was more obvious here than anywhere else. You have entire wars in every episode and there are 0 casualties. I get that parents didn't like violence in cartoons back then, but this was ridiculous. It was the main reason I preferred anime over cartoons. Moving to 1984. These titles have defined my childhood. They are still holding up today, and in many ways nobody managed to replicate what made them so fun. Dated visuals aside, you just gotta check them out. As for the must-watch movies of the year, there is 1984, which was made in 1984, and became a landmark of dystopian sci-fi. And in case you want something more down-to-earth, there is Greystoke, easily the best version of Tarzan, for focusing on the dehumanizing side of civilization. In fact, everything about these years is about dehumanizing. In books, Neuromancer is another classic cyberpunk tale. In TV series, Bioman, the oldest Super Sentai season I like, has villains who are dehumanized androids. In anime, Fist of the North Star is about what will happen if the Wokes take over the world. It's also historically the first fighting shonen and it's about muscular men punching each other. In video games, the first version of Tetris came into being, although it didn't become a success until USSR collapsed many years later. Because communism is dehumanizing you and doesn't let you promote your work. Finally, in cartoons, the Transformers came out. What's so dehumanizing about them? Well, I hated the humans. I was just watching it for the robot action. In retrospect, I know that the cartoon is based on Japanese toys and that was mostly created by Japanese animators, but at the time I didn't know that, and the initial audience was American, so it counts as a cartoon. Regardless of what I knew or not at the time, the Transformers are a big part of why transforming robots got popularized in the West and weren't limited to a Japanese oddity. I wouldn't be such a huge mecha fan if it weren't for them. Sure, I gotta watch more mecha around the same time, but even then there was a lot of creativity in a series that was only supposed to be an infomercial. Many of the storylines were bordering horror, especially after the second season when everything became about space traveling instead of being stuck on Earth. And yes, there is always the infamous death of Optimus Prime that made so many to be mad and further made the series memorable for a type of controversy that happens nowadays every other day. I personally never hated that scene because I never got to watch the movie as I was growing up. They never brought it to the single VHS store of my village. I got to watch it in my late 20s when I was appreciating permanent deaths far more than I did as a kid. With that said, do I still like the Transformers beyond the impact they had on me? Not much. After watching so many mecha series, they don't feel special anymore, especially because nobody dies. The movie everybody hated was the best part of Generation 1. As for the other generations and reboots that came afterwards, I was never into them. Too much horrible CGI and too many human sidekicks. I was cringing every time they were on screen. I just wanted to see some damn robot transformations, goddammit! And then the live-action movies came along, which were the usual Michael Bay explosions and boobies. I gave up caring after that. Moving to 1985, where the rule of cool continues with movies such as these three to the left. The ones I consider must-watches are Brazil and The Purple Rose of Cairo. They are the definition of anti-escapism and they don't forget to be funny at times. In books, the Ender saga began being published, which, for some reason, people thought these were some really deep sci-fi, when they were completely naive. In TV series, MacGyver began airing, a rule of cool series where someone can make a nuclear bomb with a rubber band and a couple of lemons. The practicality of his inventions was questionable, but the action scenes were great. In anime, Area 88 comes out and proves what an actually serious war drama is all about. It's definitely not underage lesbian pop idols in high schools. In video games, the first Super Mario Bros. Game becomes a smash hit, thanks to Atari fucking up and letting Nintendo to take over. And in cartoons, the Thundercats began airing, which were essentially a vastly improved version of He-Man. Better visuals, better characterization, and one of the best music scores ever made for a kids show. It was the ultimate science fantasy action adventure at the time, and was making my imagination to go crazy with all the great ideas it had. I was a low-tier tunie for many years, in case you didn't know, and this show was the reason. Beyond that, I can't overlook the fact that none of those great ideas had any actual continuity. The show was almost entirely episodic. It was just adding more characters and locations in every season, but it wasn't doing something with them. Which is a shame, because by the time it was over, it had enough world building for a vast setting with its own politics, magic system, ancient history, and several side stories happening at the same time. This was fixed in the reboot several years later, although that version had its own set of problems. And there was also too much reliance on the Sword of Omens. Almost every conflict was being resolved by using an OP MacGuffin, which is why when for whatever reason they couldn't use the sword, the tension was tenfold. From a point on, it was just excuses for taking the sword away, and that became very limiting plot-wise. All that aside, I have fond memories of the show, despite the really silly dialogue and the mostly one-dimensional characters.